Hello, beautiful people. It's Mama Goo. So last week we took a look at a vintage film from the 1940s showing the diet culture of the time. One of the biggest takeaways from this video was that, one, the people of that time that were considered overweight or obese would now be considered as normal weight. And number two, the diet and exercise advice in that film is still pretty much great advice today. Well, except maybe about drinking milk with every meal, brought to you by the National Dairy Council. I had a request or two to show what the men did for diet and exercise during that period. And in researching this, I stumbled across a diet experiment. It wasn't all cute and kitschy. It was actually psychologically damaging to those men, and for some it caused long-term damage. I had heard of this experiment sometime in the past, but as I took a deep dive into the subject, I found it very interesting, and it was a compelling look into the human psyche. And some will say this experiment was highly controversial, but it did provide information to more effectively treat ED sufferers currently. The study was known as the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, and the basic protocol of the study required that the male volunteers lose 25% of their body weight, and this had many ethical concerns. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment, also known as the Minnesota Semi-Starvation Experiment, it was conducted during and after World War II to investigate the physiological and psychological effects of severe calorie restriction and starvations. It was conducted at the University of Minnesota. Specifically, it took place at the University of Minnesota's Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene, which was headed by Dr. Ansel Keys. And it began in 1944 and continued into 1945. As some may recall, Dr. Keys' studies contributed to our somewhat flawed understanding of the role of dietary fats in cardiovascular health. Well, we'll get to that a bit more later. The purpose of this study was to gain insights into how the human body responds to prolonged periods of severe food deprivation, as it was highly relevant to the post-war rehabilitation of famine-stricken populations in Europe. There were 36 physically and mentally healthy men who were chosen for this study. One of the first controversial parts of this experiment was the method which the men were recruited. To understand why this is controversial, you have to understand the sentiment among the United States population at the time, which generally was characterized by a strong sense of patriotism and a desire to support the war effort. The attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan on December 7, 1941, galvanized the American people and led to a united and determined response. Everyone was expected to do their part. Strong and able men were expected to fight in the war. The women left behind often filled in for the jobs that the men left. This is where the Rosie the Riveter concept was brought about. The entire U.S. population was expected to ration and sacrifice to help the war efforts. But there were still many people who, for one reason or another, objected to the war, and these men were greatly looked down upon, even if the objection was due to deeply held religious or moral ethical beliefs against taking part in armed conflicts. So if an able-bodied man was a conscientious objector, the U.S. government still required him to perform alternative services as a way of contributing to the war effort, without directly participating in combat. Keys was able to coordinate and gain the cooperation of specific government agencies such as the Selective Service, to officially approve participation in this study as a way to perform an alternative service. Thus, over 200 men applied to the study, but only 36 were chosen to participate. All of these factors contributed to the criticism that this study lacked ethical standards as compared to today's research health standards. The concept of informed consent as we understand it today was not as well established during the time, and the ethical guidelines for research involving human subjects were less stringent than they are today. The participants may not have had a full understanding of the potential physical and psychological hardships they would endure during the experiment. They were informed to some extent about the purpose of the study and the nature of the restrictions, but it is unclear whether they were fully aware of the extent of the challenges they would face. The most controversial part of this experiment was that this study had a protocol of requiring these 36 normal weight men to lose 25% of their body weight, which is generally considered very unhealthy by today's standards. The experiment consisted of 3 phases. During the first phase, the participants were provided with a control diet that met their daily caloric needs to establish a baseline measurement. In the second phase, they were subject to a semi-starvation diet, which provided about half of their daily calorie requirement, or about 1,800 calories. This phase lasted for 24 weeks. And the third phase, which was the refeeding phase, where the participants were gradually reintroduced to their normal calorie intake. This phase aimed to investigate the effects of refeeding and recovery from starvation, which was really the key to this study in order to provide information on how to most effectively reverse the famine in war-torn European countries. However, what the actual insights uncovered during the study were quite different and somewhat unexpected. The participants experienced significant physical and psychological changes during the semi-starvation phase. They lost a considerable amount of weight and showed symptoms such as fatigue, weakness, irritability, depression, and obsessive thoughts about food. Their metabolic rates decreased, and they became obsessed with food, recipes, cooking. Participants also experienced mood swings and apathy. Some even developed EDs after the study. Although controversial as the study was, the Minnesota starvation experiment has made significant contributions to our understanding of the physical and psychological effects of starvation. While it wasn't directly focused on eating disorders, the insights gained from the study have had implications for the treatments and understanding of these disorders today. The study provided valuable data on how severe caloric restriction and starvation affect the human body and mind. This information has been essential for understanding the physiological and psychological changes that occur during periods of extreme dietary restraint, which is relevant to understanding the experiences of individuals with EDs. The findings from the semi-starvation phase, which included mood swings, preoccupation with food, irritability, and obsessive thoughts about food, help shed light on the mental health aspects of eating disorders, particularly in conditions like anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. The refeeding phase highlighted the importance of careful and monitored refeeding in the treatment of individuals with EDs. Sudden refeeding after starvation can lead to refeeding syndrome, a potentially life-threatening condition. And finally, the body image concerns. The participants' dissatisfaction with their image, even when severely underweight, has provided insights into the distorted body image often seen in individuals with EDs. Understanding the psychological factors behind the body image disturbances is crucial for developing effective treatment. Therapists and clinicians working with these populations have drawn on the study's insights to develop more effective interventions, particularly for addressing the psychological and nutritional aspects of recovery. In summary, while the Minnesota starvation experiment was not focused on EDs, these insights have informed our understanding and treatment of EDs, helping clinicians develop more effective strategies for addressing the complexity of these conditions. As a postscript to the discussion of this study, I wanted to circle back to a discussion on Ancel Keys and why he was considered by some to be a controversial figure. Although Keys had many positive contributions to the diet industry, including playing a particularly significant role in the development of the Mediterranean diet concept, which typically includes a high consumption of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and olive oils, and is generally regarded as one of the healthiest diets. Some critics argued that he selectively chose data to support his hypothesis, and that his emphasis on saturated fat as the primary cause of heart disease oversimplified a complex issue. Specifically, dietary cholesterol had a strong contribution to blood cholesterol. Over time, scientific understanding of dietary cholesterol has evolved. It is now recognized that for many people, dietary cholesterol has a relatively modest impact on blood and cholesterol levels as compared to other factors like saturated fats and trans fats. However, individuals with a specific genetic or metabolic conditions may be more sensitive to dietary cholesterol. Nevertheless, his work had a profound influence on public health policies related to diet and heart disease, and it contributed to the development of the dietary guidelines recommending reduced saturated fat intake for heart health, which ultimately led to the low-fat diet craze of the 1990s, which some argued launched the beginning of America's descent into ongoing and increasing issues of morbid obesity. But we'll have to leave that discussion for another day. I will link some additional videos in the description, including one video made by one of the experiment's actual participants. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for stopping by. If you like this type of video, please make sure to leave a thumbs up and your comments in the comment section. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. We'll catch you on the next video. Bye.